Welcome to Chill Out. I'm Pam Chill, one of the Highland Park senior producers, and today's program is entitled The Traveler's Dictionary. And I'm pleased to have one more time for his return engagement. I think this now makes three.
Four.
Oh, four. Okay, I knew I lost count. Eugene Finneman, welcome again. Thank you so much. Writer, lecturer, researcher, and former champion of Jeopardy! So, and also to your credits, you have been published in the Chicago Tribune, the Wall Street Journal, Street.com, the Financial Awards. They said do not support a middle-class standard of living, but you do writing for all types of venues and events and symposiums, and
yes,
and you do lecture, and especially on history.
Well, yes,
I consider you researcher
history with an
historian.
irreverent perspective.
Yes, absolutely. So tell me about Traveler's Dictionary.
Well, language is an odyssey. And, travel, let's go with the basic. What is the English language? Well, the very words English language are a perfect example of the wonderful incongruity that created our language. English, language, two different derivations right there. English, a German tribe invaded Roman Britannia in the 5th century. The Angles, along with their kindred barbarians, the Saxons, swept away 4 centuries of Roman culture. And so they created, English, England. Whereas language, however, came over with another invasion. It's based on the Latin word for tongue, but with a French accent. Lingua. But the Normans, who were Vikings who had the originality to invade France rather than the British Isles, set up their own region called Normandy, acquired a Gallic veneer of civilization, picked up the French language, and when they invaded and conquered England in 1066, everyone should know that, they inserted a new language, literally a language. They called it, what they said, what we're talking about is language, And so English reflects that. English is a complete, wonderful linguistic hodgepodge. As I said, it's the ripe fermentation of barbaric German, Norwegian accented French, secondhand Greek. All the technical terms we use are Greek. Technology.
Latin?
And of course, punchlines in Yiddish. I mean, through, hundreds of years of history, commerce, technology, the English language has amassed a vocabulary of, according to the Webster's Dictionary, a total of 470,000 words.
Oh, I have to make a note of that.
470,000 words in our language. The French, by contrast, do quite well with 135,000. The Germans have 330,000 words in their vocabulary. Of course, each of their words sounds like it, is twice as long as an English word, so it balances out. For instance, we say dictionary, where the Germans would say Wörterbuch. Wörterbuch, which literally means word book. It makes sense, but not exactly lyrical, is it?
No.
But
how about Spanish?
Spanish, again, is based on Spanish, about 250,000 words, same as Italian. Spanish, like French, is based on Latin slang. When you say, what is the term? Do you speak Spanish? Hable español? Mm-hmm. That is, to Julius Caesar, you just said, "Are you telling a fable in Iberia?" Mm-hmm. Apparently the language ferments from the bottom up. Generally speaking, and so it was some Roman sentries were kidding each other. Tell me another, Marcus. And the natives of Spain were hearing, are you lying to me again? but he's saying, oh, you're saying, are you speaking? You know, and so tell me a fable became, are you speaking?
Oh.
And the same thing happened in France, although in France it was a little stranger. It was, instead of are you speaking, eloquent, you know, as a Roman officer might say, the Romans, you know, foot soldier would say, are you telling me a parable? Parlez, parabolas. I mean, you know, so language is slang, or at least it develops over time into respectability. And frankly, the English language shouldn't even exist. It's an anomaly. I mean, we should be speaking a Latin dialect with a Celtic accent. No dovrai parlare britannico. I mean, that was me imagining Barry Fitzgerald reciting Dante. It was a case where, you know, because if you think of when the Roman Empire collapsed in the West, overwhelmed by German tribes, I mean, the Visigoths didn't try imposing their dialect of German on Iberia. They adapted to the, you know, the predominant culture. The Franks, well, they insisted that Gaul rename itself France, but they Gallicized themselves as well. But when the Angles and Saxons in the 5th century invaded Britannia, for some reason, the Britons didn't seduce them with their Roman culture. They themselves became somewhat Germanic. If you were to do a genealogical check, you know, they can do that now, of the British people, of the English people, they are virtually genetically identical to the Irish and the Scots. They're all Celts. But in Britain, they picked up a German language, Old English.
Right. I was going to say Old English or proper English.
Well, Old English, proper English is simply what you hear on BBC.
Okay.
You know, but Old English sounds like a summer stock production of The Student Prince. I mean, that's you know, oh, Heidelberg is lovely, you know. But no, it would actually sound somewhat like a Welshman gargling. You know, Old English. It's German, but it's you know, it's a German dialect. I mean, there were some traces of Roman culture left. I mean, Londinium, the name's stuck, you know. But by and large, 4 centuries of Roman rule meant nothing in Britain. Strangely enough, the people did retain their Christianity. They didn't lapse into Druidism. They didn't convert to Valhalla's gods, you know. But they did absorb the German culture. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Wotan's Day, Thor's Day, you know, Frei's Day, you know, the names of the Anglo-Saxon gods. It was, you know, so, but, as everyone should know, the Normans conquered England in 1066. Remember, the Normans themselves were speaking Norwegian accented French, so it wasn't, you know, they weren't exactly graduates of the Sorbonne. But they imposed their language on their subjects. And so you had this hybrid between the, you know, Norman lord, his Sax English victims, English victims, and the hybrid became Middle English, the language that we associate with Geoffrey Chaucer. And, you know, this vocabulary became a scramble of French words and Old German words. If you listen to Chaucer, you know, the Droth of March to the Rot, I mean, it's, you know, it's hard for us to tell, but, you know, you can sort of make out half the words. The pronunciation is completely different. Every syllable seems to be elongated. Maybe by the end of the 14th century, the bubonic plague had encouraged people to speak quickly. We don't have much time. We're going to die in 3 minutes, whatever you got to say. But, you know, so by the time of William Shakespeare, we would understand him. He would sound like he was doing an audition for the Beverly Hillbillies, but, you know, and he would think that our syntax was really strange too. But by and large, we could understand each other, you know. So but language is in continual ferment, you know. Every word tells its story, you know. That's why I love etymology. I mean, English language did not, emerge fully developed from a business lunch between Shakespeare and Noah Webster. You know, languages evolve. As I mentioned, French is based on Latin slang. Words migrate from one culture to another, and their meanings mutate and deviate over time. As I said, Julius Caesar would be able to function in Paris. The city's location would have come to surprise to him. He just knew there was a village there, but he would understand.
But he would understand the language and be able to communicate.
He would think it was a bad joke. I mean, rue, well, that's based on the Latin word for rut. But if you think about it, wagons make ruts, the ruts become roads, and so rue and rut does make sense. The French word for head, tête, that's the Latin word for a pot. Again, Roman slang. He would be a bit bewildered how a Roman word for trade, merci, became the French word for thanks.
Thank you.
But we still retain roots of the original Latin word merchandise, mercenary, something tradable, a commodity. But how it became thanks, as I said, parlez-vous français? Do you parable?
I do.
I mean, huh? It's an ongoing odyssey. I'll give you a personal example. I was in a correspondence with a reporter, and she wrote in that I was loquacious and bemusing. Now, only half of her Ivy League education was wasted because she correctly used the word loquacious. Loquacious, again, the word Julius Caesar would have used for speaking, However, she was completely off about bemusing.
Bemusing.
Of course, I was too polite or craven to correct her, Besides, in 10 years or so, she may be right about the definition of bemusing. But in the meantime, what does bemusing mean? Okay. A, does bemuse mean to confuse? B, does it mean to reflect on a situation humorously, or to find humor in a situation? Or C, does it mean to inspire Rimsky-Korsakov to write Flight of the Bumblebee? Bemuse.
Bemuse.
Okay, for the last 300 years, the dictionary has said that bemuse means to confound. However, in the next edition, it may mean B, to be amused.
Right.
I mean, language is inherently democratic. If the majority of people misuse a word, the error becomes the correct definition.
Like the dictionary changes.
The dictionary has to. Okay, let me give you a recent example. Or did you voice in the last election? No, you voted. Why? Because in the 15th century, a clerk made a mistake confusing the Latin word vox, which is voice. I voice my support for you. He wrote instead votium, which means vow. He was a clerk in Scotland. It was but somehow it spread to England, and the mistake proved popular. So instead of saying I voiced my support, you said I voted.
Oh,
there was a mistake.
Early on, we had elections. Yes.
Well, yes. Well, it was just who wants to go to war with England? Which of my thanes, which of the clans want to go with me to attack England?
Right.
And let's please voice your support.
And no Russian influence then, right?
No Russian influence then. At that time, I don't know what. The Russians. I mean, what spy? Okay, what information could the Russians have gotten through espionage in the 16th century from the British? Maybe long division. I mean, they. I don't know what great breakthroughs the Russians, wanted from the British at the time. Actually, Ivan the Terrible did offer to marry Elizabeth I. Now, since she was a virgin queen, she certainly wasn't saving herself for Ivan. And he had 8 wives anyway, which was 2 more than her father did. But, so she politely refused his offer. But Russia, and England were on good terms politically.
Better than now, yes.
Well, who knows? I mean, anyway, so bemuse is evolving into a synonym of amuse. And it's an effortless error because, let's face it, bemuse sounds like to be amused.
To be amused, right?
Yeah, I mean, so it's, and ironically, when correctly used, it's still easy to mistake because, if you're confused, you might also be amused by the situation. How absurd is the situation? The New York Times actually made that mistake. The New York Times. They said that a Midwesterner was bemused by what was happening in Washington. Now, actually, it meant theoretically he could have been confused, but the reporter was trying to say the Midwesterner was amused. But, the mistake still theoretically could have passed because you could be confused and amused. Anyway, I mean, etymology is, what we're talking about, the derivation of words.
Now, what is it and why does it intrigue you so much?
Well, it's fun. First off, etymology, again, the Greeks, the wonderful Greeks who could get, 6 words from 2 syllables. Talk about the original recyclers. Etymon means the true source. Ology, well, we know that from lots of words. It means the study of. Biology, zoology. In this case, etymology means the true meaning. It's the history of words. Every word tells a story. As I said, why do we say the word? Where did we get it from? What did it originally mean? We live history, and each word is a demonstration of that.
You must do such an incredible job tracking all of this to find out the actual origin of a word.
It's fun.
Yes.
It's a lot. I mean, the dictionary is a surprising source of, scandal, but many respectable words often had earthy, origins. Sometimes gruesome, sometimes scandalous, but the Traveler's Dictionary is an example of that. Travel is literally a form of torture. Makes, in some ways,
kind of, yeah.
If
you have to get up early in the morning, you have to take all your luggage, and
but
you don't know what's going to happen, and you're leaving your home behind, and
it's
some people
not a
love
complete
to travel,
surprise.
And some people have an horrendous travel experience.
Well, at one point, travel was always terrible, but it began 2,000 years ago when some of those Roman foot soldiers in Gaul were grumbling about the drudgery of building roads and aqueducts and other future tourist attractions. And, some Gaul who was eavesdropping and his ears were sharper than his Latin mistook the Roman slang for what they were doing to be work. Guess what? Travailler is still the French word for work. Anyway, the Gaul, it caught on. Hey, this is the way the Romans say work, travailler, And when in fact it was more like a torture device, sort of like a makeshift rack. But the slang was, this is torture. Oh, no, he just said it's work. Well, work, torture, it's not complete stretch. The Gauls, the word spread among the Gaelic population. Gaelic and Gallic are also the same word because the original inhabitants of France were Celtic too. The Gauls misinformed the Franks. The Franks misinformed the Normans. The Normans eventually misinformed the English when they weren't slaughtering them. Now, French modesty and Viking charm are clearly oxymorons. And that dubious heritage was evident in the Normans' rule of England. They conquered and cowed the English, and the English may not have understood their overlords' French, but they learned to give it the worst possible meaning. So when you were ordered to travailler, work, in French, to the English that meant, oh God, what a burden, what a hardship this is going to be. And that became our word travail, hardship.
Oh, okay.
You know, because the Normans were, may I say bastards? You know, they hadn't caught up with the chivalry craze yet, so they were just being cruel and overbearing. Anyway, okay, so life was full of travails, hardships. And in those days, in the Middle Ages, going on a journey was a travail.
Oh, yes. And how mostly did they travel? They traveled
by
foot.
Right. Especially the poor, by foot. I mean, when you were going, for instance, on a pilgrimage, you know, these people were devout in the Middle Ages, you know, they were going on foot. It was not easy. I mean, even the Normans would acknowledge the risks of going on a journey. I mean, where there were roads, the wayfarer found that robbers had the right of way. If you could afford an inn, you could also catch whatever plague was, being served there.
Yes.
I mean, the English Channel also seemed to be God's way of saying travel should be done only as a desperate, desperation, under duress, travail. Now, considering its inherent burdens and dangers, this particular travail eventually, acquired, traveling. The distinction of, travail and travel became one and the same, at least to the medieval English mind. Interestingly enough, the letter V had not yet developed, And so, Geoffrey Chaucer would have used the word travail, but he wouldn't have used the letter V.
How many letters were there in the alphabets then?
In the English version of the Roman alphabet, 24 letters. I and J had not yet distinguished yet. And W and V had not separated yet. So you might say, oh, I'm going on, you might have spelled travel with a U, but pronounced it with a W, as a W. You might have spelled it with a W. It wasn't until about the time of the Renaissance that, that people started using the letter V. The printing press helped spread the use of the letter V. And also the idea of the Renaissance, where travel can be enlightening. Visit these places. It's not, especially if you're wealthy now. These wealthy aristocrats, these spoiled Oxford graduates. Let's go, they had a broader, more enlightened idea of travel. And the letter V to spell it. Now, in the subsequent 4 centuries, our attitude toward travel and the spelling have remained consistent. Yet, we still have some medieval forebodings, of the origin of the word travel. I mean, we still are, shall we say, timid about dysentery-flavored cuisines, and as well as French arrogance. And indeed, many of us suspect the modern form of the Roman rack is called flying coach. So whether it's etymology or irony, travail and travel remain synonymous. So that's one example. Luggage.
I was going to ask that, the origination of luggage, and something to put your belongings into.
Yes, well, originally luggage was carried away kicking and screaming. In 8th century Scandinavia, courtship was a matter of lug. That uniquely Viking verb means to pull by the hair.
So now, that's how they'd find their mate, right?
Well, obviously, since a Viking's interest, usually went further than that, lug also made an excellent euphemism. Of course, the responsible Norsemen did not just lug them and leave them. Even Viking etiquette recommended that some of one's children should be legitimate. That constraint, however, did not apply outside Scandinavia, and that proved quite an incentive to see the world.
Oh, of course.
Now, Britain was all too often the destination of these medieval SAS tours, and given the effusive nature of the Vikings, the English language was soon enriched with such Norse words as slaughter, wreck, plunder, kidnap, and of course, lug. Lug made a particular impression on the British Isles, introducing red hair to Scotland and Ireland and leaving Eastern England blonder than Western England. The Anglo-Saxon, picked up the word, and with either a genius for understatement or a very low opinion of his abducted sister, redefined lug as hauling a burden. Okay. Now, the pronunciation luggage, luggage, came over with the Normans again. In 1066, Normandy's Duke William the Bastard conquered England in the hope of improving his nickname. The Normans, as I mentioned, as that telltale Nor indicates, were descended from Norsemen who had the originality to overrun France rather than England. They had converted to Christianity, although their idea of practicing Christianity was just simply shaving. They were still the ruthless, rampaging, rogues they'd always been. And from their Viking grandfathers, they had the rampaging hormones. However, from their French grandmothers, grand-mères, they had acquired a need to sound nasal and to have the last word. So the new masters of England had no compunction about the practice of lug, but they preferred the pronunciation of luggage.
Luggage,
right?
Yes, as opposed to luggage.
Yeah. Well, it would become that, but it was still the idea of, Now, around this time, troubadours found steady work telling the nobles how wonderful they were. The knights, not knowing sarcasm when they heard it, began to succumb to the troubadour's chivalry shtick. Although the church had tried to discourage the knights from slaughter, pillage, and lugging, except on crusades, of course, it had only appealed to the nobles' decency, which is always a failure, but had it appealed to their vanity, that might have worked. The troubadours were appealing to the vanity. So now a major concession was made regarding luggage. It would no longer be free to the enlisted men.
Oh, you was a baggage fee then too?
Well, that's exactly. Well, you're getting to it.
You're
anticipating, because of course the English soldier could hardly be expected to fight 100 years' war without any luggage, but an army cap could always attract women of rentable affection. These entrepreneurs were available in the rear of the camp, where the supplies were kept. So whenever a soldier needed his morale boosted, he could always find some luggage with the baggage.
Alrighty, I'm going to have to stop.
Anyway, so the words became overchanged.
Because we're very, very close to the end. I just wanted to say, if you did want somebody to contact you, yes, what would be your contact information?
Call me at 847-291-9408.
Oh,
that's my business number.
Okay.
Because I would love to talk about these
yes,
all these topics. I have more. I mean, just more on this.
Oh, this is just a tip of the iceberg.
Well, I haven't even discussed excursions yet. How they once were offered short trips to death. So no, there's lots to talk about.
Oh.
I mean, and I have other topics.
Talk about a group on vacation, right?
There's, so and these and other topics. I talk history.
Well, you are always as amazing as ever, and as educational, and give a different perspective, and quite amusing. I don't know, or amusing, as they say. A little bit of both for you. Again, Eugene Finnerman, thank you so much for appearing on my program today.
My pleasure.
And giving everybody a chance to really learn about the history of travel and English and language, and in comparison to all the other languages. Thank you so much once again. I'm just so happy to have you on. It's just a delight, and please come back. Thank you.